Right. It's a bit strange for me to be in this session specifically because it is catered around monetization. But although my part is mainly focused on marketing, I think it is a great tie-in to the end goal, which is when you get your audience to listen to your show, what are the different ways where you can capitalize on that interaction, on that connection? The goal then is, how do you even get that kind of connection? So I've built something called the SnS framework, and it's heavily related to my opinions on why the future of podcast marketing is omni-channel. And I'm sure there's some comments later on there on, shall we say, monetization, or where can we go from there. But let's start off with a few things first and foremost. So yes, as Chris mentioned, I'm with Renegade Radio, and I host a few podcasts. One of them is Podlines Asia, but Chris has mentioned Rome FM, which I will be using as the example in this talk. For more details on that show, it's a show about a note-taking tool, which is actually this exact screen that you're looking at right now. This is the tool Rome Research, and I do interviews with people who are obsessed with this tool. And the premise of that is that I found this tool and I was really obsessed with it. I wanted to build a podcast around it. So I built that show, Rome FM. It ended up becoming my most popular podcast out of all 6 podcasts that I host and publish and produce myself. So this is already a little bit unrelated to Renegade Radio already, but this is more on the shows that I'm willing to produce for myself. Rome FM ended up becoming popular not only because of the show, but because of the presence of the name Rome FM beyond the scope of what podcasting means as a medium. So with that being said, I wanted to focus on what we want to do when it comes to growing a podcast, and why what do you want to do with the audience, whatever it is. Current conventional tips and tricks for growing marketing a show and growing it are not enough. And I don't know if any of my fellow speakers here are going to disagree with me, but I feel that it's not enough. The standard conventional practice of podcast marketing is regular posting on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, a picture on Instagram, a Facebook post saying, new episode out, listen to us on here, at a scheduled time every week, and or basically use a social media tool to just schedule all this beforehand. And most of the time, the return on the effort into that, the return on investment for that, isn't as high as you hope it to be. It's mostly because a lot of people would know that that post is either obviously scheduled, or it doesn't really serve the individual who is paying attention to that post in that moment, in that context. So a Facebook post is, a Facebook post updating people there's a new episode is only going to give the individual person the question of, so what, right? Like an Instagram picture of someone that, a new episode out. So what? And previously to a different talk that before this session, there was a best practice in terms of when I want to grow the show, what's the best way to do it? A lot of people would they wouldn't really encourage this, especially a lot of podcasters nowadays. But you have a lot of people posting either on Twitter or on any other social media channels where they would ask for podcast recommendations. And, that's a very humble request. That's a typical request to ask. And that's great. Like, you have great intentions. You want to know more about podcasts, but you ended up becoming flooded with a lot of people who are pushing their own show, and it leaves a bad taste in one's mouths. Do people think that that's a way to grow your show? No, it's not. But people do it anyway. It's bad practice. A lot of what's considered normalized podcast marketing tactics are seen prevalent. Like it's very common across a lot of communities, not only within Facebook groups as well, but also on Twitter and on LinkedIn, where people are mostly pushing their show, getting you to listen to them, getting you to open their app, getting you to say, hey, look, I'm talking about my show. Come to me. Now, I noticed the intention behind that is great because your end goal is to want to grow the marketing aspect of your show. But when we're doing something like that, we're not really thinking about it from the perspective of the person who's actually paying attention to what you're doing on these channels. How can we better serve our audience, our listeners, by growing our podcast and talking about our podcast, not in front of them, but with them, is the question that I want to answer in this talk. And as I'm seeing this, I noticed that the opposite case with Rome FM, it ended up becoming my most popular show because my episodes are not consistent. They're like every 1 month, every 2 weeks, every, when I feel like it, etc. But my listenership and my growth and the community around the show has been growing because it is now beyond a podcast. It has a movement behind the name. So I'm under the firm belief that the future of content creator marketing, especially podcasts, is omni-channel. And this is because of something is what I call a resonant audience. Now, for the standard podcaster, you would think of your listeners as your listeners. That's it, right? It doesn't matter if they're in whichever social media channel. It doesn't matter if they have heard the name of your show. They're all listeners. We have looked at our analytics and we are primed to think so. But a resonant audience is a chance for you to think from an omni-channel perspective. A resonant audience they consist of fans that are not only listeners. The resident audience is people who are centered around the following things, which I hope it would come out here. The resident audience is centered around the identity you strive for and hope to attract, the narrative or mission you're walking towards through your show, and the principles that you are fighting for. Your show has to mean something for someone to be loyal enough to continue listening to the show. Now, what this means is that if your audience is resonant enough, they are willing to follow your show, your principles, your identity, your narrative, your meaning beyond the scope of your podcast, irregardless of medium. Because one thing you need to understand is that your fans have different consumer behaviors. What I mean by consumer behaviors is the following. Picture this. Why do a lot of people post audiograms on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn? Because in that summary, in that 1-minute clip, you can get a lot of insight within that context, within that allotted amount of time. Not only is it a way for you to grow your show, it is also a great way for you to capture the audience that only has that available amount of time consuming your insight, consuming your narrative, consuming or figuring out what's your identity. This is very, very important, which means that you have an audience that loves what you say, but may not have the right environmental factors to listen to the entirety of your episode. What if they only care for 5 minutes out of your 1-hour episode? What if they only care about your episode from the perspective of just one guest? So one episode, I mean, if you have like 200 episodes, right? You cannot discard their presence in, your overall community just because they only have, a certain level of attention span or a certain level of context that they are relevant in. So your resident audience then consists of all kinds of viewers, watchers, readers, and listeners, and others that consume your mission in different levels of attention span, in time decay, and in social media of choice. Time decay and attention span, they're heavily related to each other, where, do they only have 5 minutes to read or find something powerful in your episode? And social media of choice is where they listen to your show. Very, very important here, because a fan of your show on Instagram will act differently than a fan of your show on LinkedIn. You can just even think about the semantics of someone trying to connect with you on each of these two platforms. When you think about it, then your podcast, but what is important is that your social media presence and all of your communication channels are a show in itself. Your LinkedIn is your professional impression. Your Twitter is when you can build a thread of very interesting stuff that's coming up. Your Facebook is a chance for you to do some long form engagement with your Facebook groups, with your closed communities. And now you're thinking from an omni-channel perspective. Your podcast is now beyond a podcast. It is now a mission, with its primary form being a podcast, but the way it communicates with other people is a show in itself. And therein comes your metrics of success. They have to change, because it's not just listenership rates. Your readers love your content, but they're not listening to your show. Should you disregard them? That's sort of unfair, right? So it's not just listenership rates or the analytics on your favorite podcast hosting platform. There may be others that you should consider. What if it's the number of discussions? What if it's the number of engagement, the level of engagement? This is something that I would want to strive for many podcasts, whereby we try not to obsess too much over numbers, although I understand the importance of it. But with that being said, once you understand these three principles or these 3 points, let's move on to the actual framework in itself. So the framework is the SnS framework, and it consists of the following. It consists of spike, sustain, and that's pretty much it. Spike and sustain are 2 parts of podcast growth that are heavily important. And the first part is spike. A spike is any activity that results in the spike of downloads/engagements. For example, a new episode of a famous guest, getting news coverage on your podcast. What this means is that if you're on a graph where the x-axis is time and the y-axis is your level of engagement, then a spike is any activity that results in a spike of engagement because something interesting is happening. But if you stop after a spike, your level of engagement will drop down just as fast as you would spiking up. And that is when you do something called a sustain. A sustain is any activity that results in a decline in the gradient of engagements over time. Not to increase your listenership, not to increase your growth, not to increase another big thing. It is to prevent the decay of your engagement, a preventation, like a preventation, right? Some examples would be social media updates, a bit like the new podcast episode, such as that. Now, this is when there's some conflict here, right? Because normally people would be talking about, oh, consistent social media updates, etc. But you notice that the standard new app updates, like for example, new episode on Tuesday, this episode is out, that's it. And that's all you do for marketing. It's a weak spike and also a very weak sustain. So what's the best way to make the most out of these two? Is to combine both a sustain and a spike. The secret is performing hybrid, a combination of both a combination of both spikes and sustains at the same time. And this is when I have some experience firsthand with this, with Roam FM. So Roam FM is heavily active on Twitter. Roam FM is not active on your favorite podcast listening apps. The episodes rarely come in, but it's my most successful show. I don't know why. It turns out that people now follow the Twitter account more so than the show itself. What I did to do a combination of both spikes and sustains is episodes with high quality guests, long tweet threads on the episode itself, and pair that with long tweet threads not about my show, but about the topic that my show covers. The goal is to be a thought leader or a key opinion leader or the authoritative figure on this topic, regardless if my show exists or not. Because then This is now a spike and sustain of your following. Now you have a potential chance of people following your conversations with people, even if the message is not in podcast format. Another example is having advanced show notes, because there are some members of your resident audience that would consume your podcast through your show notes. If you have timestamps, I have a few people who copy and paste timestamps to people so that they can click directly to the episode fragment of their choice, cater to that audience, and they will thank you. And they will share with the rest of their cohort, their circle, their network. The point of a hybrid activity is so that you can now outsource a large part of your sustain and a percentage of your spikes to your audience. You don't have to do all the social media work now. You can engage and start discussions. You can create topics of choice, or basically large conversations in a public space. So whether it's an Instagram picture that consists of a topic or discussion, and you don't want people to go to your show, you want people to comment within your, shall we say, within your comments on your Instagram account, or a tweet that is a question out there for people to respond back to you. There are many different ways to do this, but the point is this: your audience is fragmented in many different pockets of the world's general attention to you and your mission and your podcast. Your podcast is your primary way of delivering this content, but it is not the only way. And with that being said, to connect this with monetization to a certain degree, this means that you are now not limited to the standard monetization channels to just podcasting to make money off your podcast. If you have an active social media presence on Twitter or on LinkedIn or on Instagram, there may be business opportunities, there may be sponsorship opportunities, etc., through the DMs on these relevant social media channels. But the resident audience, the percentage of them that are willing to create deals with you, may want to reach out to you from a specific channel because they know you are active in there. They know you're creating a community around your name. They know that not all of your audience are listening to your show, but they follow you regardless. Your resident audience is not hindered by the obstacles of being only in one medium, and that's podcasting. It could also be in a different social media channel. So yeah, to conclude, really, the spike and sustain framework is a way for you to not obsess so much over listenership and to focus more on your overall presence, your omni-channel strategy. And from there, you can try to figure out what are different ways to make money, what are different ways to grow, because you are now not limited to what podcasts are capable of doing. You now have the world in your hands, because now you're just not limited. So yeah, with that being said, thank you so much. And if you want to reach out to me, you can just tweet at me or send an email. And yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Awesome. Great job, Norman. A lot of valuable information. Thank you. Yeah, Dave. Look at Dave. Dave, hey guys, Dave's professional. If you guys didn't know that, you're in for a treat next too from Dave. But Norman, yeah, great job. I really like the spike and sustain message you discussed there. That was real good. And when you mentioned the timestamps, I thought that was a big utilizing nowadays. We do have some Q&A, so we'll get started with those because you have some more time. We'll go here. This one: what to post when there's nothing to post? ? Just to keep showing up in social media and keep the audience engaged.
Okay. What to post when there's nothing to post? That's a great question, because I reach that point a lot. This depends on your topic, right? You have this mission behind you running the podcast in the first place. You now also have a following, a listenership, an audience that is willing to engage with you no matter what you talk about. The best way to initiate anything is, one point, like you said, just to keep showing up in social media and keep the audience engaged. But a point even beyond that. Start the discussion. Be the point or be the foundation from which discussions in or surrounding your topic initiate. People, like, the point of this is that even if you have nothing to post, that's actually an opportunity. You now have a clean slate, anything goes. And to maximize that potential, what you do is that you now have a goal of, I want people to talk in my presence. So let me start off the first step. So questions out there, discussions, a bit like forum posts, etc. Have people commenting and responding and replying, and respond back to them. Because in the end, not only are you giving the chance for people to actually show up, even if you have nothing to post, but you're also humanizing the interaction. Because there's nothing more beautiful than having the host of a show that you listen to talk back to you. Like, isn't that amazing? Like, we now have that. Now, if you try to provide that for everyone over and over again, build that habit, then boom, that's a spike. And that's also a sustain at the same time.
Yeah, great. That's the engagement. Just starting those conversations is huge. Going that extra step and showing up. And I think one big thing, and I know we'll probably get into a little bit more as we go in this session, is it really comes back to knowing our audience, the listener, because then you're going to know what you're looking for. So you're able to then create more content. But great response there, Norman. Great question as well. Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
No, he hit the nail on the head. I was going to say, if you're not sure what to say, then ask your audience.
Yep.
Like, what would you like to hear on the next episode?
Yep.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's best.
Yep.
So many people ask other people, what should I do with my audience? And the answer is, go ask your audience. They'll tell you.
Yep. And it involves them. It gives them a sense of ownership. It gives them, especially like, even if I thought this was a cool idea I heard, was people asked, they got ideas for episode topics. And then during the episode, they said, hey, yeah, a member of our community, Dave, he asked this question and we wanted to cover it. So then you connect it with their name and you've drawn them even closer to becoming those raving fans.
And I can guarantee you, if you said, Dave, this topic was brought to you by Dave, you know who's going to tell all their friends?
Every Dave that listens.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be like, I can't believe it. I just sent him an email and I'm right there on the podcast. You don't get it. Yeah. So
yeah, it just raises the level. So awesome. This next question.
Audio social app. Okay. So to think of this as intentional constraints for a fragment of your audience. If you have an intention to engage with your podcast followers segment of your entirety of your podcast audience, and you're able to, reach out to them, talk to them, have a one-on-one with them, right? Maybe give them a shout out on the next episode or something like that, and you can convert them into a loyal fan. Yes, I think it is a great way. It is a great way, but caveat, I don't think you should depend only on an audio social app. Because as what I've mentioned before, yes, an audio social app is a great way to engage with your followers who are already listening. But there are a number of fans who are, just because they're fans doesn't mean they're actually listening. And like, this is the best way to think about it, right? Sometimes you have a fan or like a hero that you idolize on Twitter or somewhere else. You're not always going to be consuming everything they say in every single format. Sometimes you only just want to see them do one tweet and then you're just done with them. Or sometimes you are a fan of their book, but you're not a fan of their podcast. It's the same thing here, right? People choose to be in the context that they are most comfortable in to consume your content. In this case, an audio social app is a very, very specific one. If you have a really good way of converting them to a super fan, go for it. Go for it.
Awesome.
Yes. So many people say, I wish I had like a team of people that could help me spread the word about my podcast. You have one. It's called your audience. And what an audiogram is where you're going to your Salesforce and going, here's some marketing material to go help promote my show, because they already know you have a podcast. But if they tell their friends, because birds of a feather flock together, then you can get your audience to help spread the word. So yeah, I think that's really where audiograms come in handy. You're giving your audience something to tell their friends about your show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Spot on. Great questions again. Another one coming in. And we can hit on this one. Is advertising in other I mean,
This is
if you have the money to
Get
put
more
towards the
money or
ads,
time.
right? Exactly. What do you
Yeah.
have? Exactly. So a
Yeah.
lot of constraints.
Yeah.
to it,
a
I
lot of
think.
factors there.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it can help if you know who you're targeting and you know how to get the ad targeting and the ad location down. I think it could be beneficial, but it's going to take some optimization, as you probably have heard, things like that, and you got to get it right. So you might be throwing money away if you're purchasing ads to try to get it out there. You have a big free advertisement as your social media, and so starting with that and really getting good at that platform that your audience spends time on, and getting them to, that's gonna be your best bet starting out until you can get the monetization to cover your ad budget, unless you just have it. And if you're loaded, great, do it.
I would never
Yeah.
spend money to promote my show until I had somebody that I'm not related to listen to it and give me honest feedback. I see a lot of people now wanting to jump on the Facebook ads and this and that. I'm like, have you gotten anybody to give you some? Oh, we got great reviews in Apple. And I'm like, those are the people that like you.
Right.
Like, you know, so that's the thing I see sometimes that I'm like, you might want to hold off just a second first.
Yeah, it shouldn't be something that you should prioritize. To me, at least, like from my framework's perspective, advertising in other podcast apps is a very expensive spike, right? You're paying money to do a spike increase in listenership, choosing a specific app, and all the listeners within the app to engage with your podcast, which is also a spike that's possible with social media. Right.
Yeah.
So if you have money to burn, sure, go for it. I'm not confident for this idea, so I can't really recommend to you. It is a possibility, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people starting out, they want those quick gains, you know, they want those quick spikes, and they think, hey, throwing money at ads is going to get in front of people, it's automatically going to grow. But again, if it's not tailored to that ideal listener, and you're not targeting them, then you're really just throwing it away. So I would agree with both of you guys, what you said there for sure. Last one that we have right now. How do you have engaging discussions with our audiences?
Engaging discussions. So I will, speaking from Rome FM's experience, it's a combination of, it's actually related to the previous answers that we've provided, where you ask the audience what do they want to hear more on, because that's also a discussion in itself, right? You can always go back and forth, agree and disagree in public and talk more about it. That's already a discussion. You can also think out loud in public for developments in your topic and your mission. Where are you going to go from here? What are you interested in? How do you react to this news? Because sooner or later, there's a percentage chance of you sharing your thoughts out there for the audience to see, for them to potentially respond back to you. But that's a little bit more in a copywriting perspective. You want to make them want to reply back to you. So therein comes the balance of asking your audience for participation, thinking out loud in public, and engaging in discussions also with other audiences from other parts of the social media community, whether it's another podcast or some other influencer or figure in the same topic or industry. There are many different ways to do it, but you need to have a balance of all three. Prioritization given to you being the foundation for potential discussions to happen. So those three.